Hi, I'm Bryce.
I'm Brian.
I'm Sandra.
I'm Katie.
All right. And here today we are going to talk to you about our interviews with some students about Educate to Innovate. So the student I interviewed was a high schooler here at around West Lafayette, and she was not aware of the program Educate to Innovate, um, but I was able to still discuss with her her view of the STEM field and how she's enjoyed her high school experience with science thus far. Um, when we were discussing things, we kind of got the typical response of where the student seems disconnected from science, or they don't see the continuity between like physics, chemistry, math, and all that. And they were very used to the idea that doing science is more like a plug and chug, like there's an equation for an answer, stuff like that. And this is obviously like if you look at further on in science, not the trend you would like to see, and you would like to help them see the cohesiveness of it and the idea that the math and the other sciences are related and that you can use them as tools to help you solve for answers you might need in science. Um, so, um, uh, yeah.
Cool. I interviewed a math major at Purdue. So she was a college student and not a high school student, a little bit different perspective. But first off, I asked her if she had ever heard of Educate to Innovate. And like Brian's student, the person I interviewed had not either. So I kind of talked to her about the ideas of Educate to Innovate and what it was hoping to produce in American scientists. And she thought that it was cool that us as a nation was trying to get better at science because, just in recent years, you can kind of tell just based on comparing us to other countries that we're maybe not as good as we used to be. One thing that I thought that was interesting that she mentioned without me even asking it right away, she wanted to talk about what people thought about science and what people specifically thought about somebody majoring in a STEM field. And she, mentioned that a lot of times when she mentions that her major is math, she gets the reaction of, oh, that's hard, or, oh my gosh, why would you ever want to do that? Just because people don't have a very good, they're not very comfortable with the idea of science or the fact that anybody would want to do that with their life. So she kind of sees a need for improving people's perspective on STEM and STEM fields.
That's really interesting that you bring that up because that's just every time I tell people I'm a physics major, they're like, "Oh God, this guy." And it gets really annoying after a while. So that's interesting that you bring that up. Brian, you were talking about how the student had noticed, or how the student thought of STEM as doing a lot of plug and chug type stuff, and that's interesting that you bring that up because last time I talked a little bit about the research that I had done and talking with the professors, and one of the things that they were very upset about is how students come in to college physics courses with that mindset that you have to look solely at, you find the equation that works with whatever you're doing, and then you find the information you're given, and then you plug in the numbers, and that's your answer. And that's just totally against what most of the STEM professors that I've worked with have really wanted for their students to understand. And so that's interesting that you bring that up, that that's something that the student actually identifies STEM with. So
Yeah, that's something I've noticed too from my field experiences, that oftentimes you see this a lot with ICT courses, that the students in those courses, they can range, I think, from freshmen to seniors. And a lot of times their mathematical background also ranges. So some of them haven't actually passed Algebra 1 yet. So the teacher can't teach the course with that assumption that they understand algebra. So a lot of times they'll like have, say like, the ideal gas equation, PV equals nRT, they'll solve for each individual or each variable individually, just because the teacher can't expect the students to do that. So I think a lot of times it's hard to overlap these courses, even though we say they're very cohesive and they should be. But you also need to have these like foundational knowledge beforehand. So I think it's hard sometimes to also having a diverse classroom right now. Everyone has the same background, so it's hard to try to keep everyone on the same page. So I feel like people can fall behind from that, and that might help. That might lead teachers to having it more like plug and chug work and stuff like that.
Yeah, I also think that the class size also affects how students learn, because like I know here that we have some of these, it's a very focused school on engineering, so those classes are usually very large. So I think it's also hard for teachers to teach students when they have a 500-person lecture, because when you have that many students, it's hard to teach on a one-on-one basis. So because I talked to a student here, well, a TA here, she's actually going for her master's, and she said that as a student, she found that she did a lot better when she was in a smaller class, because her major was small, and that actually helped her a lot rather than when she was in a really large class setting. And I think that's almost easier to do the plug and chug and like just easy answers to equations, because there's not much you can do with that many students. So I think that's a reason why a lot of the teachers go that route. But I think it'd be better to start looking into ways that we can change that, so that students don't feel like that's always the case, and they'll get a better understanding.
I think it's kind of interesting how, and all of us have kind of mentioned this when we start talking about the people we interviewed, but not very many people know what Educate to Innovate is, which is why we haven't really been talking a whole lot about it. And just like the fact that if people don't know what it is or what it's trying to achieve, can it be effective? Or is it going to just be like a blind thing that people don't know that's actually happening, or something like that? And Bryce mentioned something about his interview, and that if teachers don't know what Educate to Innovate is, the students are definitely not going to know what it is, because the teacher's kind of the method for relaying information like that.
And so, it's hard to expect students to be able to use these concepts that we're trying to get them to use, like not plugging and chugging things, if that's not the way that we teach science. And so I think that overall, Educate to Innovate really may not be, I see where it's coming from to try to help get more students involved, but if we don't work on how we teach STEM, it's really not going to be effective, no matter how many people we have in STEM fields. And so I guess that's one of the things that President Obama tried to do, that we were talking about in the first thing. We're creating, 100,000 STEM teachers. He mentioned it had to be 100,000 effective STEM teachers. And so, however we can do that, but we're already 8 years into Educate to Innovate, and most teachers don't have any idea what it is.
Or the fact that there's a need to be effective, or a need to increase our effectiveness in not only getting more people to be in a STEM field, but getting people to actually understand what's going on.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Instead of the plug and chug.
Yeah, and I think a large problem of this too is the difference in the form of assessment on a high school and a collegiate level. So the kind of cookbook idea comes from the fact that you have your ECAs and I-STEPs, those kind of mandated tests that you have to take on a high school level, and there's a lot of merit pay based on that. So for a teacher, maybe they're more focused on the fact of trying to get their students to do well and pass these exams, but then when you go to college level, they want to do more, like you said, critical and deep thinking. So there has to be more of an overlap there, because we're not we're not teaching the students to be properly assessed on a high school level. We can't expect them to go to college and be prepared for that form of assessment.
That was one thing that my teacher actually mentioned, is that the science department that she works at is trying to make more, or is trying to offer a lot of different AP courses, AP Physics 1, AP Chemistry, AP Biology, AP Environmental Science. All of these courses are going to be, they can lead into huge and very growing fields like environmental science or chemistry and things like that. And they also have APES is starting to take off, and a big enrollment because it's so very math friendly and stuff like that. But even College Board is reluctant to make AP exams accessible to students with student need or special needs or language concerns. And so if one of the other things that Educate to Innovate set out to do was create a more diverse STEM field, but if College Board, the people who create these tests, aren't doing it, then it's really not going to help.